Hey, my name is Caroline Harden, also known as Birdie Bristlecone, pretty much everywhere online. I am here today to talk about North Carolina House Bill 237, also known as the Unmasking Mobs and Criminals Bill. I was able to talk to Senator Sidney Batch today, who has been one of the more vocal opponents of the bill and has been in a few hearings about it. So enjoy.
I do want to respect your time, so I'll just go ahead and get into a couple of the things that I had in mind. First question that I had was a brief explanation of what the bill says. Actually, let me go back and let you introduce yourself now that now that it's
You're like, oh,
recording, and
you're
then
like,
we'll talk about
that's
what the
right.
bill is.
I was gonna say you gotta put that in like a bullet point or
Yeah,
something.
we'll figure it out.
So my name is Sidney Batch, and I'm a Democratic state senator in the North Carolina Senate.
Wonderful. And you have been in the hearings for this, correct? That has
Yeah,
been
so I serve on the Judiciary Committee, and then we also had a floor debate this week where it passed out of the Senate, and so I spoke both in committee and then also on the floor about this bill.
Gotcha. So I feel like that's why I wanted to reach out and talk to you specifically because I feel like you have some actual insight on this because you've been involved in a lot of the parts of the process. So if you wouldn't mind giving us sort of a brief explanation of what the bill says.
Yeah, of course. So the bill in general says that you can't wear a mask if you are in public. And we used to have exceptions. In 2020, we actually added a health exception during COVID because the law was put into place in order to tamp down on the KKK in the 1950s. However, since that time, uh, we ended up adding language that said, okay, you can actually wear a mask because it was a pandemic, right?
Mhm.
So we added that. However, the Republicans, my Republican colleagues, ended up running their bill to go ahead and remove that provision and allow some other additional exceptions like Halloween. Medical professionals can still wear their masks, and some societies and organizations, if they get permission, can wear masks, hoods, etc. However, they did remove the health exemption. And so, what the bill now does is it criminalizes anyone with a class one misdemeanor for wearing a mask in public. And it does not give an exception at all to any health conditions. So if you're immunocompromised or if you're trying to protect someone who is immunocompromised, if you are sick, you can't wear it. If you just have the sniffles, can't wear it. And you can't wear it in public. So that is one of the biggest issues with regards to the bill. The Republicans say that they want to pass this bill to go ahead and tamp down on mob law and some protests and other issues that have occurred. However, when my Democratic colleagues and myself brought up reasonable requests that would still address the initial purpose of the bill, but still protect the immunocompromised, all of those efforts were denied.
Gotcha. All of that being said, how do you think this bill will actually be put into practice?
Yeah. It's interesting, and it will, what I'm really interested in seeing is how that will pass. Right now, it's passed out of the Senate. It's in that, and it has moved to the House. I think that there's been a lot of attention, and I really appreciate you drawing attention to this because we've heard from a ton of constituents, and this is frankly not a partisan issue. That we voted on partisan lines, but we're hearing from Republicans and Democrats alike, especially with those who are immunocompromised, stating that they're really concerned about the bill. My Republican colleagues will say, well, we believe in common sense and the common sense of the police and other individuals so that they won't just arrest somebody that has a mask. But at the end of the day, it is in fact a criminal offense. So people have
Mhm.
to choose whether or not they're going to wear a mask in public to protect themselves or someone else, and potentially get charged, or stopped by the police, or told by a store owner, if you don't take your mask off in my store, I'm going to call the police, right? So there's a lot of other implications that are going to occur, and these are in public spaces. And at the same time, while we are, of course, not protecting those, and frankly have now allowed for another pandemic potentially in the future to occur, we can't actually put any type of state mandates. The Department of Health and Human Services can actually force or ask individuals to wear masks. And frankly, if you wanted to wear a mask, you have to just roll the dice. And so it'll be interesting to see how it is implemented in practice. But I'm very concerned about those who, frankly, are just fearful that they don't want to be stopped by a police officer or charged, and they put their own health at risk by going out in the public and still doing their jobs and living their lives because they have to do that. And
Mhm.
they get sick because they're choosing to follow the law but put their own health at risk.
Right, that's definitely what I'm hearing from a lot of the disability and community in the state, as well as people concerned about racial justice as things are often applied unevenly. When it comes to a timeline, I know that you said that there's been a lot of public contact. Is there any kind of expectation on when this might be put into practice, when this might become law? What are we looking at?
Yeah, so now it's over in the House and they don't have to bring it to committee because of the procedural, very boring and mundane rules. I will not bore people with that. But what they do have to do is they basically just move it to the floor and then the House can vote the bill up or down, right? So yes, I agree with it. No, I don't. They can ask not to concur with the bill and then have what's called a conference committee, a small group of individuals that go behind closed doors, try and actually negotiate between the two chambers and come out with a new version. But at this point, it appears that they would have it on the floor if they want to proceed with that bill next week, and the House will have to make a decision. The House members will not be able to actually run any amendments or try and improve the bill, unfortunately, because of the way that it's been moved over to the House. And so if any changes need to be made, the House will have to not concur and then send it to that conference, to the committee so that they can go ahead and hopefully make some exceptions, some reasonable exceptions that we proposed and that got voted down in the Senate to protect the health and safety of our communities and our loved ones.
Gotcha. So if they do not vote that to send it to that, if they vote it through, what kind of timeline does that look like? Does it go to the governor's desk? What are we looking at?
Yeah, exactly. Great question. So if they vote to concur and it passes and they have a supermajority in the House and the Senate, then it goes to the governor's desk. We don't know whether or not Governor Cooper will veto the bill. And so he has three options. He can, of course, allow it to become law after 10 days and not sign it. He can veto the bill and send it back to the House and the Senate to see whether or not we have enough votes to sustain his veto, or he can sign it into law. What I know to be the case is that it is highly unlikely that he will sign it into law, and I suspect that we'll be dealing with a veto issue. Unfortunately, in North Carolina, there's a supermajority of Republicans in the Senate and the House, and they can override the governor's veto. So we'll have to have some really brave Republicans stand with us to make sure that this bill actually does not pass, because we know how dangerous it could actually be.
Okay, this makes a lot of sense. I'm hearing some best case scenarios where it can be, not concur, and then also could be potentially people not voting with party lines. Worst case scenario, when would the average person who's wearing a mask be at risk of being charged in public?
Yeah, I have to look back at the bill itself to see when the effective date is. Normally, they make most effective dates consistently at the end of the year or at like a July 1st date. So the bill has an effective date in there, and it would be effective on that day. I am not sure what it is off the top of my head, but it would potentially, if it's like most bills, it'll be either July 1st of this year or it will be at the end of the year starting in January 1st. So within the next 6 months, it would actually become law and people would have to make the hard decision of wearing a mask or potentially getting charged with a crime.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. If you have some time, I do have a couple of questions from
Yeah,
the
of course.
community that I'd love to. Okay, great.
Happy to
Um,
take any questions. I'm happy that you
yeah,
are actually drawing attention to this issue. So I am here for however long you need me.
amazing. How would this affect people who choose to wear a mask while they are voting? Is this something that would be completely, they'd be unable to do? Would this prevent people from going to the polls with a medical mask on?
Right. So as of right now, yes, there's no exception. So when we were in the Senate, I actually ran an amendment that would allow for masks to be used if you are sick, right? And if you did that and an officer pulled you over or asked you to remove your mask to identify who you are, you would have to comply. That was voted down. So as of right now, there is no intent language, which my colleague Senator Grafstein also ran in an amendment to say you have to prove that I have the intent to actually commit a crime while wearing my mask. I'm trying to, of course, obstruct my face. So the intent is not there with regards to the surgical masks. So she ran an amendment to say I can wear one so long as the intent is not to hide my face. Right now, if you go into any public space in North Carolina, you could be stopped if this bill passes, of course. You would be able to be stopped by a law enforcement officer, or somebody could call the police on you if you, in fact, have a mask on because it is a class 1 misdemeanor and they don't have to prove that you had the intent to hide and disguise your face. So that includes polling places, that includes hospitals. right?
Mm.
I mean, someone couldn't potentially tell somebody if they walk in with tuberculosis, the doctors can wear masks, so that's an exception, but the doctors can't force patients to wear masks.
Mm.
And so immunocompromised individuals in the hospital could be further at risk because they're in a hospital setting where, especially if you're, again, in a public space, you can't force someone to put a mask on. I mean, that's also the unintended consequence, right, of passing the bill as it's written, because even hospitals and other places in public health cannot require individuals to wear a mask and to protect the community.
I think that's where a lot of people are coming into some questions about, gray areas with places, specifically places that provide medical services. Where is the line drawn with a workplace that could require a mask? Are there exceptions for places that maybe provide healthcare, but are not strictly healthcare facilities like nursing homes, assisted living, or pharmacies? Are there exceptions for people who work in those environments?
Yeah, so there are exceptions for individuals who work in those environments. So the nurses, the doctors, if you need to wear a mask for your job, you can do that. What it is unclear, and I think is pretty concerning, is that it doesn't say that you can require your patient to wear a mask, right?
Mhm.
And this
Mhm.
this is dealing with public settings, but we also have a number of places in public spaces where there are hospitals, right? Public hospitals like UNC or any of the many places where there are a lot of state dollars going to help in this industry, could potentially prevent someone from, or I'm sorry, not prevent somebody. They could actually ask someone to wear a mask and the person could just say no. And some of the hospitals, we've heard from some of the hospitals concerned with the unintended consequences of this bill and how they're going to actually protect the individuals that they've been sworn to, of course, keep safe and healthy. And I don't think that that's any different in what you've already referenced with regards to, nursing homes, skilled facilities, et cetera. I mean, the list goes on and on. And those are some of the things that I wish that my colleagues, and hopefully the colleagues in the House, will listen to when individuals call them or send them emails, or even if they talk to us about why we really think that this is a bill with unintended consequences and they have the ability to actually fix it before it becomes law.
Mhm. It does seem like this should be something that obviously goes against the Americans with Disabilities Act, but it does seem that there's enough loopholes that maybe not. Is there an expectation of how the ADA might come into conflict with this?
Yeah, so I think that we actually have some history in the federal courts where I think Texas ended up stating that that there was a mask ban in schools, and they were sued, and the court said actually it's against the ADA, I believe is what they concluded, and stated that children who have disabilities or need accommodations have the right to wear a band. So I do believe that what we will likely see in North Carolina, unfortunately, is constantly in the court for all of the wrong reasons regarding the bills that are passed out of both of our chambers, is that we will likely see a lawsuit and that provisions of the bill will actually be struck down as unconstitutional and violating, obviously, whether it be First Amendment rights or violating the ADA, et cetera. And so in the meantime, while we wait for litigation to move through our appellate courts, which sometimes is at a glacier pace, individuals are going to have to sort of make the decision again as to what they're going to do. And that is not something that you should put people in that position, right? And
Right.
that's what I'm really concerned with.
Yeah, I think when people are thinking about disabilities and how they are treated in public already, I think a lot of people are concerned about caretakers and family members not being included, even if the ADA does help along with some of these issues that are affecting people with disabilities, because it's expensive to get a diagnosis, it's difficult, it's time consuming, and sometimes you can't even get one because they can't figure it out. The house MD is not real. You can't just stay in the
Right.
hospital until they figure out what's wrong with you. So I'm just wondering, where is the opportunity to have people be allowed to protect their families in there? Is there any kind of argument that people can make against that, even within the confines of not being disabled, but living with a disabled person?
I mean, are there arguments that can be made? Yes. Are those legitimate arguments? I would say no. I think that we have tried very much, and I've worked with the bill sponsor to give him language to go ahead and actually make those provisions and those protections. And that was an amendment that was voted down by all of the Senate Republicans. And so when you say that we can just trust people's common sense and we can trust that people aren't going to just get arrested in a mask. What I would tell you is that, again, we're picking and choosing which laws we should or should not actually enforce. And if in fact it is going to be illegal, which it is, we should probably fix that, because as someone who's immunocompromised when I was going through my own cancer treatments, my sons and my husband wore masks for much longer than they wanted to, and then I wanted them to, but they also wanted to keep me safe. And now my husband and my sons, if we were in, if something happens, I have a recurrence with my cancer and I am immunocompromised or sick for any other reason, like a lot of people that walk around who might actually get COVID again, they're not going to be in that position to be able to just say, I don't have to have fear while I walk around. And one of the most frustrating parts of what we've been dealing with is that I sit in a chamber with individuals and many of my Republican colleagues that talk about freedom all the time, and that we should have the freedom to do certain things. Well, this bill does the exact opposite, right? It takes your freedom away to protect yourself or to protect your family. And so now you have to decide, because you've determined in your infinite wisdom that immunocompromised individuals and or their family members cannot choose to keep themselves safe. And we now have to make the choice of wearing a mask to protect ourselves or to save someone's life or to be criminalized. And it makes absolutely no sense. It flies in the face of anything reasonable. And it's really, I think a lot of the arguments are disingenuous or disconcerting. They're not mutually exclusive. Frankly, I think they're probably both.
Yeah. With the discretionary application of it, it does seem to target communities that are already vulnerable to over-policing, who might not be doing something that they could be charged for, but then they are wearing a mask for disability reasons or to protect themselves and their community. Does this seem like something that's going to get abused for reasons other than disabilities or protests? Or does this seem like something that could be a huge problem really quickly?
Yeah, I mean, I do believe that many people have common sense, and the vast majority of us have wonderful and good intent. But we also know that there are individuals out there who do not. And if I want to put on a mask because I'm immunocompromised or because I, have some contagious disease, frankly, we have a measles outbreak, I believe, right now in 2 areas in the state of North Carolina. We just had a case of tuberculosis, and that's highly contagious. I mean, good luck to the person who wants to meet with the person that has tuberculosis and potentially roll the dice on getting sick, right? That patient probably wants to keep other individuals safe, but yet they're going to have to make that choice. And so if you're talking about individuals who may be going to practice their First Amendment right and go to a protest for education, to raise teacher salaries or whatever the list may be, and you happen to be someone that is at that march, which is a peaceful protest, and has a mask on, but then bad actors from outside come in and everyone gets arrested, you get arrested, and you weren't there with the intent to hide your face. You were actually there because you were practicing your First Amendment rights. And frankly, even if you were there and you were just a bystander, they can still arrest you because, again, there's no intent. If you're wearing a mask in public, it is a class 1 misdemeanor. Period. End of story. Full stop. There's a lot of conversation out there that people say that, we're fear mongering and that that's not true and it won't happen. But as my mother said, statistics don't matter when they happen to you. And so for the one person who ends up getting arrested because they're wearing a mask to protect themselves or their family members, and they have to deal with the criminal potential conviction and losing their jobs and all of the other things that come with that, I would say that that's again, another disingenuous argument. I don't think anyone's going to take that very seriously. And I hope that people aren't get arrested because they have a mask on, but we know that history has shown that that's not actually the case in many situations where we talk about laws where they say they'll pass it and it won't have unintended consequences, especially on certain populations. And that's just not the case.
Yeah, I can see a lot of people in the COVID conscious community just saying that we might just continue to wear our masks regardless. But I feel like there's a lot of privilege in that statement, and that, somebody who looks like me might not have a problem, but somebody who doesn't look like me might just, get arrested just for stepping outside their house with a mask on. And that to me is unconscionable. And the vagueness of the law allowing for them to apply it so unevenly is really concerning to me. One question is the law clear about religious freedoms in terms of facial coverings, or does this potentially open up some extra harassment for people who wear burqas or a niqab?
Right. So I think that you're absolutely right. There's no protections for religious freedom. So women who wear burqas could very well be stopped and arrested because it is a face covering, and therefore you could just be charged. We asked about that. It was not answered. There are not exceptions for it. And so I believe that as written, you would not be able to wear a burqa in public and without fear of being charged with a class one misdemeanor. And with regards to your statement about privilege, I think that's really important for people to recognize. And you have talked about this, but COVID had killed 30,000 North Carolinians estimated, and 3 million, I believe, contracted COVID. Disproportionately, communities of color were affected much, much more and worse. And there are a number of individuals in the Black community who will wear masks for a longer period of time because they had a greater toll of losing loved ones during COVID for various reasons. And so, and disproportionately, people of color also have more interactions with the police, right? So again, it's just adding another layer to what if you just put in a bill to protect those individuals and still allow for them to pull their masks down to identify who they are to a police officer if they ask. I mean, that was a simple suggestion. Like, we're not asking for you to just throw the entire bill out. We were just asking for a very easy accommodation that is nonpartisan, that we are hearing from Republicans and Democrats alike, that was a very fair amendment. And yet we were told, hard stop. We're not doing that.
I am
Well, welcome to the North Carolina
processing a bit
General
of this.
Assembly.
Yeah. Um, okay, let me look at my list of questions so I can collect my thoughts a little bit because um in terms of air travel commuters, North Carolina has some very, very busy airports. Is this something that the moment they land, they're going to have to take off their mask or risk being arrested in the airport? Or is this something that, there's provisions for travelers?
So, excellent question. And fortunately, the federal government hasn't passed this law. So, all of the airports are, if you are in a federal airport, which the vast majority of ours are, then you can, of course, be there with your mask. Now, if you have your mask and as soon as you leave, Raleigh-Durham airport and you're on the main streets and the public fairways and state roads, then, well, you are now under the laws of North Carolina. So fortunately, if you are on a plane or if you're in an airport, I do not believe that this bill will affect your air travel. It will affect the spaces in which you move in after you leave the airport.
Understandable. Okay. When it comes to, and I think you talked about this a little bit before, but when it comes to future pandemics, is this something that we could expect to do all over again, to have the health and safety exemption added and then removed? Or is this essentially effectively removing our ability to wear masks during a pandemic ever again?
So we will have to trust the elected officials who are in office at the state level at a time that a pandemic is put in place for us to actually move forward with allowing for exceptions for wearing surgical masks, et cetera, in situations for public safety and health. There's been a lot of talk in 2020. They said, oh, well, before 2020, people didn't get arrested and they could wear masks. Nobody's gotten arrested. And it's like, okay, well, again, I would say that there are lots of laws that were passed many, many years ago that needed to have changed, that people supported, but that made no sense. And so therefore, that's what happens when we, God forbid, higher order thinkers in this world advance and listen to science and say, well, we need masks. So as of right now, if we have a pandemic tomorrow, or not tomorrow, but after this bill, let's say 2 years from now, if this bill passes and we have a pandemic, the Department of Health and Human Services in North Carolina cannot, they can issue language that says you should wear a mask. This could help you and save you, but no one can be forced to do it. And so schools would have to decide whether or not they were going to make the recommendation. But by making the recommendation, you're actually recommending that people break the law because, again, it's a class one misdemeanor. So I really have a lot of hope in this world. But what I won't bank on is hoping that the individuals that are in that General Assembly at the time that we have to address this issue again, which it will happen again, actually will listen and believe science and put this provision back in place. What I would say is you could actually just keep it in place now and not change the law because we know that a pandemic is going to occur. And even if it's not that, there could be a measles outbreak. There could be tuberculosis. Again, the 700,000 North Carolinians estimated to be immunocompromised, and their family members who want to keep them safe are going to have to choose whether or not they're going to roll the dice and get arrested and charged with a crime, or if they're going to protect their family members. And that makes absolutely no sense. Not to mention that we're making accommodations for other things like Halloween and organizations like the Proud Boys and the KKK to continue to wear hoods while in public, but we're not allowing that, right, for the immunocompromised. And what I can tell you is that we also ran an amendment on hate crimes and said any group that has been defined by the Defamation League, the Anti-Defamation League, would be banned from being protected under the exemptions of the statute, and that was voted down by my Republican colleagues as well. So as of right now, Proud Boys can still show up and get a permit and protest and be completely covered on their faces so long as they've asked for permission first. But we as the immunocompromised cannot in any way, shape, or form ask for permission. And while hate groups discriminate, cancer doesn't, sickness doesn't. And so there are going to be a whole lot of people who, frankly, are going to have to make that hard decision about how to protect themselves and their families.
That is definitely one of the more mind-boggling twists that I think this whole saga has taken about the fact that secret societies are provided for while people with health conditions are not. And even people who just at the end of the day have realized they enjoy not getting sick and how nice that is. Just if
Right.
you feel like not getting sick, you can just do that.
Right. You never ever appreciate your health more than when you can't breathe out of your nose because you have a cold.
Exactly.
We're all like,
Exactly.
oh, I wish for the day that I could just breathe. Like it, and you're right, you're absolutely right. So many of us just don't want to be sick. I mean,
Yeah.
workplaces, if you're at work and you're actually working in an office, just wearing, your mask, it's nice because not everybody else is dropping like flies. We found
Yeah.
out during COVID, and when you listen to science, that I don't know, there are easy ways that we could stop the spread of germs, but not in North Carolina. We're rolling that back for sure.
Yeah. One of the more, I think, kind of out there suggestions or kind of lighthearted, oh, well, we got to do something ideas is people wondering how hard is it to form a secret society and what what could you do? What kind of loopholes could people take in the short term while we fight to get this figured out for the general public? Is there anything that somebody could do to subvert the law, to get around it in a way? I've heard people talk about starting a Church of Clean Air, but as you said, there's no religious exemption. Is there is there
Right.
anything people can do to
So
subvert that?
it's interesting because there are, there's been a lot of talk saying, well, the KKK can't do that. Senator Newton said that while we were on the floor. The KKK is banned in the state of North Carolina. It's been illegal for years. And actually then said, well, actually, that's not what staff said in our committee and judiciary. But I went ahead and I actually looked at the statute. Being a lawyer, it's helpful. I can actually read it probably better than most. And what you find when you actually look at what they're saying as the exemption is that one, there can be secret societies in North Carolina, and secret societies can be a part of that. The statute itself, in the exception with regards to all of these different organizations, doesn't necessarily have to be secret. The only secret societies that are actually banned per that provision in the statute that still allows them to have ceremonies, marches, parades, et cetera, in public in this House bill that we're talking about are secret societies who have formed for a purpose to circumvent the laws of North Carolina or to break the laws. And while I do not agree and would never support any of the tenets that the Ku Klux Klan or the Proud Boys or any other hate group is actually purporting as their, Magna Carta of whatever they care about. What they don't say is, I have actually been formed for a purpose to circumvent the laws of North Carolina. So that they actually can do it. And I would say that they are absolutely included in that provision because we have two instances recently, one in August of 2019, where the Richmond County KK or Rockingham County KKK went to Orange County and protested on the steps of the Hillsborough courthouse, right? The Orange County courthouse, they're sitting in Hillsborough, they have their hoods on, and they are protesting. That happened in 2019. And in 2023, last year, the Proud Boys went to a New Hanover County school board meeting, and they were completely covered in their traditional garb, and they were present. And they were, from at least the news reports, were not arrested. And so when you hear this whole pushback of they're just being sensationalized and the KKK is illegal, well, if they're illegal, why has no one done anything about them being in all of these public spaces? And what I would also say is, again, going back to secret societies, you actually have to have it for a purpose of actually circumventing or committing crimes in North Carolina. Groups could do that, doesn't mean it's their purpose, right? So as to whether or not we could come up with an organization, the only challenge to that is you still have to ask permission to a county commission or a local person for a parade or for some reason to wear it in that public space. And so it still leaves all of us on a day-to-day basis out here just deciding whether or not we're going to knowingly break the law and hope that we don't get arrested and that we can trust in the common sense, as my Republican colleagues like to say, of the people of North Carolina. And I think the vast majority of us have common sense. That does not matter when you go into a gas station with a mask on, and now the store owner tells you that he's calling the police if you don't take it off, and you just got done with your chemo treatment.
Yeah. How does this interact with business owners? Is there an opportunity for them to, like, where's the distinction between public and private space? Can they say you do have to wear a mask during this time, or you can wear a mask? I'm sorry, not have to. Is there an opportunity for mask-friendly shopping hours during maybe off hours? Could they block something out? Are there businesses that will be able to allow masks in their space? Is this something that they can do?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, they absolutely could do that. I think that the real question is there's a difference between allowing it and then banning it, right? And you just made that distinction. So if a store owner that is not a public store or something like that says, I would like, you can wear masks. This is a mask friendly place. Feel free to come and shop, or during these hours, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. I don't know that they could stop someone from coming in there with and force them to wear a mask during those hours.
Right.
And what I would also say is that the business community needs to be pretty vocal about this. You know, we are number one in business for the last 2 years based on the CNBC for the best place to live or the best place for business. But we're not going to be if people who are the most talented in this country, and we're trying to draw these companies here and the best and the most talented, if they look at the news and say, oh, well, you know what? My kiddo is immunocompromised. I'm not going to put them in a situation where they're in a public school setting and they can't wear a mask because it's now against the law or the school can't enforce it, right? Et cetera. Right. So I hope that business communities and small business owners and other individuals reach out to the House members and to the Republicans in the General Assembly, both on the Senate and House side, and say, this is dangerous. Like, this is not going to help us recruit the best. It is not going to help us retain our talent. And it's really putting us in a position where it's going to also decrease our productivity when we realize that, I don't know, maybe people wearing masks have actually allowed for, this to decrease the spread of disease in people's offices, right? I mean, I think we're a more productive society when people actually just realize that there are ways that we can stop the spread of germs. And that's why it's so hard to believe. I'm like, do you not believe in science? I mean, I can understand that you were mad that you thought that we overcorrected for how long people had to wear masks and COVID, but I mean, are you really challenging the science that it works? Because, I don't really understand where we're going with that. There's a lot of ways in which we can easily explain why masks work. Science has already proven that. I mean, we can dumb it down for better analogies for individuals, but at the end of the day, we are in a situation in which we are fighting with people over basic things that science has already explained. And it just seems really callous and just has a lack of empathy when you hear from people who are really concerned about their safety. And then we're told that we're fear mongering, and anyone that has thought that they might lose their lives or become more sick, that is not only fear, but it's a reality. We're fearful because that's our reality. And so saying that we are, being histrionic is extremely hurtful, because many of us have not had the luxury of having good health, right? We just, at some point, have, through no fault of our own, gotten something that has lasted for much longer, and has put us at risk.
Everybody's one incident away from being a part of the disability community. That's
Absolutely.
one of the biggest reasons that it has to be protected, is
Right.
because it's the one marginalized demographic that you can join in a heartbeat. It's so this is a lot. When it comes to children, is this 16 and up? Is this everybody? Can kids still wear masks? And if not, is this something that would be the parent would be responsible for, or the guardian, or would this be on the child?
So, unfortunately, in North Carolina, we still have on the books that, kids can be charged at very young ages. We were trying for several years ago just to raise the age to 10 of criminalizing children, because it was 6. But I digress. So yeah, kids could be charged, is the short answer. If a child is walking around and it goes to, I will say, a gas station during lunch and has a mask on because they have, they've just come off of the flu, um, they could be arrested by the police for wearing a mask in public. It's not necessarily the parent's responsibility, right, to say, take your mask off, but parents will be, whoever's wearing the mask, and the way that the law is written is anyone who is wearing a mask is committing a class 1 misdemeanor just automatically, and therefore can be charged. So that 16-year-old, that 10-year-old, that 85-year-old grandma, the 30-year-old teacher is in a position in which they very much are going to go ahead and have to make a decision. And all of our 80% of kids go to public schools in North Carolina. And those public schools have teachers that are also worried about their own health sometimes. And so they'll have to make a decision about whether they're going to wear a mask too, and whether or not they'll get in trouble or charged. So it's just mind-boggling. I mean, we've given simple solutions. I think that's why everybody's so upset. I think everyone is just outraged because they do not understand why you wouldn't just take a reasonable amendment to protect individuals. And the answer can't just be, well, that's how it was before 2020. Well, you know what also happened before? Slavery. Women couldn't vote, right? Like, there are lots of laws that we've had to change in order to actually benefit the vast majority of individuals in this country. And I would just guess that most people believe that women should be able to vote and we shouldn't have slavery. So laws need to change. So I don't care what happened prior to 2020. What I do care about is that we know more information. And when you know better, you should do better. And we aren't doing that, sadly.
Pre-2020, it was not common at all to connect somebody's mask wearing to potential political ideologies or potential intent. And as we've seen throughout, is that masking has become such a polarizing subject, that now, it's not wearing a mask right now is not the same thing as it was wearing a mask before 2020. It does feel like this is extremely targeted to the recent protests on college campuses, protesting in support of Palestine. Has that been explicitly stated that that's who it is going after, or is that just sort of timing wise, it feels almost undeniable? Is there any kind of indication there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that some of the Republicans have stated that that's why they're doing it, right? I mean, I think the bill says unmask the criminals or whatever the title of the bill is. What I would say is two things can be true. You could want individuals who are bad actors, who are committing crimes, and who are vandalizing things to be able to not hide themselves behind a mask. And you could also allow people to practice their First Amendment rights to go to a protest or to go to the grocery store or to drive on the public streets of North Carolina with a mask on for whatever reason, whether it's the sniffles, I don't want to get sick, or I just, or I have a autoimmune disorder, and allow for them to be in a situation in which they could wear a mask and it not be illegal. And so I think what what some of my Republican colleagues want you to believe is that it's, oh, we're being histrionic, we're just making this about something else, when really it's about these mobs. And what I'd say is, we can do hard things. You could have actually just accepted our amendments that didn't protect hate groups from being able to have public demonstrations with masks. And you could protect public safety and the health of North Carolinians by continuing to allow them to wear masks and be able to simply remove them for a brief period of time for an officer to identify them. Because what they said is the identification is the issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can't identify individuals who are out here committing crimes, or we can't identify, the officers don't know what somebody looks like. Well, then just say that they have to remove the mask in order
Mm-hmm.
to identify them. And once they identify themselves and they've told you that they are wearing it for immunocompromised reasons or whatever the reason may be, so long as it's not for the purpose of committing a crime or for the intent under the bill, which is to go ahead and disguise your face intentionally, then you should allow for that to happen. This isn't an either or situation. You can address what they purport to be the reason why they're doing it, and you can still protect North Carolinians and the First Amendment at the same time.
Were there any amendments or ideas brought up regarding alternative ways of identification, or is just facial recognition the one thing that they're stuck on?
Yeah, that's a great idea. That's a great question. No, there weren't other ways of that. But there were amendments that we did run to say,
Mhm.
if the issue is law enforcement cannot identify you, and that's what we continue to hear, law enforcement can't identify who that person is. We have allowed for them to be identified by removing their masks in our amendments. Those were just voted down. So
Mhm.
again, I don't know if you tell me what your purpose is and then I give you a solution that's reasonable,
Mhm.
and then you vote that down, I wonder what your motives are behind that in the first place, right? I mean,
Yes.
we're in the crazy political cycle. I have no
Mhm.
doubt that you'll see ads that go out go out against Democrats saying that they voted for mob law
Mhm.
and to not protect our community, our streets, and our police. Can have another section on that and another segment if that actually happens. I'd put some money on it. I'm not a
Mhm.
gambler, but I'm pretty damn sure that's going to happen. And so I think that this is actually much more politically driven.
Mhm.
And there were some Republicans who came to me and said that they really wanted to make the changes for the immunocompromised. And they tried to get their other colleagues to agree and ultimately couldn't get there. But what I would also say is they still voted with them at the end of the day and voted against
Mhm.
my amendment that would protect them. So I appreciate them trying, but trying
Yeah.
isn't enough, right?
Words
You got to
behind
vote the
closed
right
doors
way.
are one thing.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I need you to, and I'm not saying that it's easy, but
mhm.
you like right is right. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's really difficult to stand out, but
Yeah.
at the end of the day, that doesn't mean that you get to go ahead and just decide, or you get to decide that you're not going to do that. But what you can't hide from are the angry constituents that are contacting you, stating that they're extremely disappointed in your choice to put them at risk. Right?
Yes.
That is your choice. That is what's called a natural consequence. You didn't
Yes.
vote the way that is. You hear from your constituents and other individuals. That's on you.
Yes. Does this, being that a mask is an article of clothing that you can wear, does this open up potential for future legislature that does determine what you can and cannot wear?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I don't know that I can't think of any specific examples as to how that would potentially be limiting at this point because their purpose is identification and
Hmm.
your face is the way in which you would identify a, a person typically.
Hmm. Hmm.
I don't know that, wearing pants versus shorts versus mini skirts is going to make a huge difference in the purpose of ascertaining and apprehending a suspect. And
Hmm.
so I would say, as of right now, that's not something that would be on the horizon and that I'd be fearful of. But also, let's be honest, I didn't think this damn bill was going to move forward and allow for us to have to argue unnecessarily about protecting the health and safety of North Carolinians either. So I guess in this
Yeah.
crazy world, anything can happen. Seems like we're in the upside down half the time.
I think the thing that brought it up for me was the specific language about intent. So if there was something that somebody could be wearing that someone could argue meant that they would probably do XYZ crime. Like that seems like a natural, horrible progression of this, but like it could come with this as precedent, even though this specifically is for identification, they're harping on it being about intent. And so that's why I'm a little bit concerned about, future things getting pegged as this is showing that this person has intent to incite fear or to do something. So that's kind of the reasoning there.
Sort of like the KKK and their hoods and their white cloaks that are still protected. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, to your point, I think we actually still protect people, and entities and groups, specifically, hate
Mhm.
groups that are still able to do that. So, is it possible? Yes. Has it been done? Not yet.
Mhm.
I think it's probably much more wrought with legal challenges.
Mhm.
Right now, we know with ADA, like you said before, I mean, this bill flies in the face of of literally federal law.
Mhm.
And so, we will have litigation if it passes, no doubt.
Mhm.
But to the extent of clothing, I think that's harder for them to get to. But again, I
Mhm.
mean, we've passed some very unsensical laws in North Carolina. So I'm not saying it's not possible, but I don't think that it is anything that we should be worried about right now.
Mhm. One question about limitations, and then I think that's basically it. If somebody is, after the law is passed, if somebody's photographed wearing a mask, is that something that they can be charged for?
Um, if they were, so the law is simple. If you're wearing a mask in a public space, you can be charged with a class one misdemeanor because you are breaking the law. So if a
Okay.
person is puts a picture on social media standing on a public street of North Carolina with a mask on, and a law enforcement officer wants to charge them, then I believe that they can be charged. And sadly, because there's no intent as to why you had the mask on in the
Mhm.
first place, they don't have to prove intent, right? It's
Yeah.
pretty easy. I mean, yes, our criminal laws are beyond a reasonable doubt, but if you have a picture of someone standing outside by a flag post at a public school with a mask on, you've already proved it's a public space and they have a mask on. And if you have the date stamp after the law passed, it seems pretty easy to be able to convict them, right? And so, yeah, I think that that is definitely something that they could be charged with and charged for and convicted of,
Mhm.
if law enforcement officer or someone else decided to go ahead and ask for charges to be taken out by the magistrate or subsequently law enforcement themselves.
Yeah.
District attorneys have a lot of discretion on what they're going to do with regards to this, and so do police with regards to stopping individuals, right? Stopping them in their cars on public ways, stopping them while they're walking in their neighborhood on a public street with their dog in the dark after 7 o'clock. Right.
Yeah.
It will be very interesting. And frankly, a law enforcement officer can't stop you now, and a store owner can't stop you, or call the police on you. But
Mhm.
it'll be interesting to see how people abuse the law if it in fact
Mhm.
passes. And that's a huge fear.
Yeah. I think the vagueness of the law has been a lot of people's biggest concern. Just it seems that it's being presented as, oh, the vagueness is its power, is because it's simple, it's just this, it's nothing more. But then the amount of gray area and space for it to be abused is really deeply concerning. So I think every question that I ask, I get answers that are worse than what I had imagined about it. It's such a deeply concerning bill. And North Carolina, as you said, we're in the news a lot for concerning bills for things that are oppressive to people. Is this something that you can see happening in other states very quickly in response to the protests? Is there any concern about that?
Yeah. And I don't know what other states do with regards to the health and safety, right, provisions with regards to mask wearing. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not those are there. But I have no doubt that you will see other bills regarding masking popping up if they haven't already popped up. Normally, the genesis of a bill is rarely not one that's been explored by other states and or other legislators before it actually gets filed in our chamber. And so I have no
Mhm.
doubt that somebody out there has probably had the idea and filed it somewhere else. And you'll see that there's a trend, like many bills that move across the country with regards to addressing those
Mhm.
issues. Um, So.
As the spotlight in North Carolina fell on it so late in the game, where it felt like, oh, it was already happening by the time anybody had any public eye on it. Is there any advice you would give to people in other states about, contacting their representatives? Is there any kind of language you would suggest that they use to maybe preempt this from happening in their own states?
Yeah, so I think that people could really just, if they wanted to make sure that this did not occur, or they wanted to enshrine in their laws that, God forbid, wearing a mask to protect yourself or someone else, they could use, the number of amendments that we have filed, and or just the language by law right now, which is it is perfectly legal to wear a mask. Now, some of these states, they may not have it on the books that they banned it. Again, that happened in the 1950s, here in North Carolina, but what I would suggest is they, one, find out if they have a ban right now, right? Is it illegal? If it
Mhm.
is illegal, then you probably need to go ahead and file a bill or contact your legislators to say that you want an exemption in that law to allow for individuals to wear masks for public safety reasons and public health reasons. And then if they are already working on trying to remove or add, a bill like they've done here in North Carolina, to ensure that those exceptions are made and to really finely tune and craft what that law is. There are a lot of bills that pass and become law that have unintended consequences. And so it's really important for people to look at what all of those provisions are. Nobody has really been talking about the hospital topic, right? And what that means in hospitals and what that means for you being sick in a hospital, where we all know people who are already in hospitals today who walk out with something they didn't come in with, right?
Mhm.
They get the flu, they get, MRSA, they get something. So you're already in a place where other people are sick. If we actually limit, right, the hospital's ability to address public safety, that's a concern. And so I would have them reach out to other organizations and groups to go ahead and have this conversation, ask them what the law is in their state, and then make sure that that coalition of groups is always watchful of what legislation moves. Because to be clear, this bill was filed last week and it passed this week. It was a week's time, right? I mean, we had to very quickly. I was up at 10:30 at night with one of the individuals on staff in our caucus, our legal counsel, going ahead and drafting up proposed amendments for the bill the night before we actually were on the floor to vote for it. Right. So it is constant back and forth as quickly as possible. And so if you can get ahead of it now and already have your game plan and you already have your network of groups and individuals, especially those with power, to speak to those in power, then you'll be in a much better position and you won't have to try and figure out what to do within, a week's time.
Yeah.
Frankly, a week is a lot longer that we usually have in North Carolina than the 48 hours that they ban abortion, and they put the abortion ban in. So sometimes we will very quickly move things through. And I think in a lot of places, you can just go ahead and get ahead of the game. So it's a great question.
As far as North Carolinians who are in it, we're here. This is happening. This feels imminent. What would you suggest that they do?
What I would suggest is that you call the members that are in the House, Republicans who have power and control over the bills and how they move through the chamber, and to ask them to vote to not concur on the bill and to make provisions to ensure that public health and safety are added back into the bill. There are other issues that people have with the bill, make those suggestions. But when we're talking about public health and safety, which is what we've been talking about today, I think it's really important for them to ask for them to pass the pass protections or pass the amendments that were filed in the Senate to ensure that public health and safety is protected with regards to people wearing masks. And that is going to be important because they may hear it and pass it as of Tuesday. And so there's a very short period of time for people to get on to go ahead and move forward. They may not hear it next week. They've gotten so much heat and pressure, and perhaps calling them now and emailing them and figuring out a way to draw so much attention to it will prevent them from even bringing it up, because it is possible that they just don't actually bring it up for a vote and it never becomes law. And that would be the best thing. Again, I'm hopeful. I don't think it's likely. I think they'll pass it. And we just need to make sure it's passed in a form that, in a state that makes sure that we are able to, of course, protect for public safety and health.
Yeah. It definitely, public safety and health is definitely one of the biggest concerns. I think the free speech issue is a huge concern with where this comes up against the First Amendment, where this comes up against the ADA and disability rights, where this comes up against religious freedoms. Those seem to me to be the three biggest things that the law explicitly addresses. And then outside of that, the other factors of the vagueness of the officer discretion and how it can be, used in so many different ways. Um, does it seem like the public health option will be the one that will get the most traction in slowing it down? Or does this, just thinking on a national scale, a free speech, what, if we're focusing on our efforts on one specific thing, where does it seem like you'll have the best payoff?
I think the best payoff is on the health and public safety, the public health and safety, and focusing really on the immunocompromised population. Because when we talk about this bill, if it passes, even if it has protections with regards to safety and health, it's still going to get sued, right? Like we're
Mhm.
like it's going to be someone's going to sue on the bill saying that, of course, to your point, that it's violating the First Amendment and people's First Amendment rights. And
Mhm.
so what I'm most concerned about, and I think the courts will work that out, what I'm
Mhm.
most concerned about is in the meantime, an immunocompromised individual making the hard choice to stay at home and
Yes.
not live in public and do the things that that person wants to do because they're afraid that they can be and possibly, I mean, they can be charged criminally, right? And so
Yes.
that, or going out because you have to work, not
Mhm.
wearing a mask, and then getting really sick and potentially dying. So I'm
Yeah.
trying to save lives and to keep people really healthy. And I feel like the that portion is really important because everything else will be worked out in the
Mhm.
meantime regarding lawsuits. But what won't be worked out is people's fear of being arrested and then making really hard choices to either be in their house and isolate themselves or go to jobs, not wear a mask and be in the public and get sick, right? And so
Yeah.
that's what I'm hoping that people can really focus on. And I also think that focusing on that, that is a bipartisan issue. I
Yes.
mean, I heard from a Republican woman who was a breast cancer survivor like myself via email yesterday, and she wrote to her Republican senator and talked about how disappointed and very, very frustrated she was about
Mhm.
how they removed that provision and it puts her at risk, right?
Mhm.
And it's like you said, we're all one really bad incident away from being in the category where we could be disabled, right?
Mhm.
We could be immunocompromised, the list goes on, et cetera. And we all know somebody. If you're not that person, you know somebody. And
Mhm.
so it does not discriminate, right?
Yeah.
This is something that is not an issue, in my opinion, that is partisan. And so you have a whole lot of buy-in with individuals, regardless of what side on the aisle they are, who they vote for, who really care about their loved
Mhm.
ones and care about themselves, and will speak out against this. And I think that's why it's the winning message because people understand how absolutely inane this actual provision is and getting rid of the ability for people to actually wear masks in public for their
Mhm.
safety or health.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we can get people to shine light on this to recognize the immediate and emergent effect that it will have on their lives and do everything we can to get it slowed down and or stopped and definitely stopped in other places if we can. Uh,
Absolutely.
I really, really appreciate you talking with me today. This was so helpful. You clarified so many things. I, yeah, I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate you and drawing attention. And I will thank any one of your followers. Thank you in advance for all the work that you will hopefully do to stop this bill from passing and or changing it to make sure that we, of course, protect our loved ones and ourselves.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to go
All
ahead
right.
and stop recording.